American law versus Jewish law. And Elia, if you'd like to read the introduction.
What are my rights as a human? Do I deserve certain things, education, healthcare, property, just because I'm alive? What about my responsibilities? Do I owe anyone anything? Am I obliged to anyone?
Okay, what do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
Obligated.
Yeah, no worries. What's your thoughts on those questions?
I think like humans deserve like certain rights, but I don't think that they should be treated like animals. But I don't know. I don't think that like this is difficult because like we have responsibilities. Humans need to do certain things. We can't just like be bad people or like not do anything or like be lazy and then get whatever you want. So
right. So it's a little bit of a mix of rights and responsibilities. So let's pull up over here. I'll share it on the screen. Let's make sure we're getting the right share. There we go. Okay. So we have over here, it starts off by giving you a warning that this might be a little bit disturbing, but just to bring out the idea. So we're going to discuss in this class the rights versus responsibilities, and we'll start off with a video. This is a video recorded last July. There were two teenagers, ages 14 and 19. And unfortunately, they had a very negative reaction when they saw this fellow in the screen drowning in a lake or a little pond near his home.
Get out the water, you gonna die.
A blatant disregard for human life.
We not finna help y'all. Finna got in.
A group of Florida teens taunt a drowning man while filming his final moments from afar.
Ain't nobody finna.
So we cut the video, but what comes out from here is that there was a guy drowning and two teenagers didn't do anything to help him. And on the contrary, they even taunted him. So Sheila, the question for you, read the question on the screen and tell me what you think. Okay, now,
why or why not?
Oh, we missed the beginning. So do you believe the teens should be charged?
Oh, do you believe the teen should be charged with the crime? Why or why not?
Okay,
Well,
let's hear your thoughts. Do you think the teens did anything wrong or not?
well, it's an omission. I don't know if you could be charged with not doing something.
Right.
Oh, if they person, I think there is a law that if you do something like neglect, like you don't get charged with murder, but there is a, like blatant neglect or something.
Correct.
Like if you allow someone to die and you don't do anything.
So over here in this case, because ultimately they chose not to do something, they ultimately were not charged. The police department wanted to charge them, but the DA said that in Florida they would not be able to be charged with anything since they didn't do anything wrong. But the question would be, what are ethics based on? Meaning, would you establish, Elia, this question is for you, would you establish any laws that would change the responsibility of those teenagers and that they should be held accountable if they don't get involved? Or do you think it's fair what happened and life is life? If you have someone that doesn't help you, it's not their responsibility.
I mean, personally, it would be nice if there was like a way to establish that kind of law, I think. I mean, there could be a law that's like, but you can't really force people to help other people. Like, you can't force people to be good people. If they wanted to laugh and they wanted to be like horrible, then that was their like choice. And yeah, they probably should have some sort of repercussion, but you can't prevent that from happening, I think.
Right, very good. So I agree with you that Western society, this law, really encourages one to help, but doesn't hold anyone responsible to help. I cannot force you to do the right thing. I can educate you, but ultimately the choice is yours. So In other terms, if you were to summarize the Western legal system, what would you say it's built on? Sheila, if you had to give a summary of, in one word or a few ideas, what is it that you would say the Western?
Well, in Western, it's guilty. It's innocent until proven guilty.
Right, correct. That would be regarding a crime. But in general, if you were discussing.
Hello, I don't hear you. Well,
Let's pull up over here in the student book. Let's scroll down to text number 1. And let's read this paragraph, and then we'll be able to identify the element of American law. I'll give you a hint. You can read it on the screen over here. It's inside of the text 3 times. So read the Declaration of Independence. Sheila, if you'd like to read this paragraph.
we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, government are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of the ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Okay, so how would you summarize this paragraph? Which word is mentioned 3 times?
Right.
Right, very good. So it's rights. Western law is based on, we all have rights, and people say constantly, I have a right to do this. You cannot infringe upon my rights. Now let's look at that in contrast to Jewish law. So we have over here, this is from Robert Cover. He was a Yale professor. He died at a young age, but he writes in an article comparing the 2 cultures. We'll have more of the text later, but Elia, if you'd like to read from this box.
Text to Robert Cover. Oh, Robert Cover, Obligation, a Jewish jurisprudence of the social order, Journal of Law and Religion, 5/1, 1987, 65. Every legal culture has its fundamental words. When we define our subject as human rights, we also locate ourselves in a normative universe at a particular place. The word rights is a highly evocative one for those of who have grown in the post-Enlightenment secular society of the West. That's it.
So, right, so yes, in our society, the word rights is the main key word. Now continue with the question that we're gonna ask. Continue reading those options, yeah.
Based on a rights-based system, which of the following are true? 1, a person may not steal another person's property. 2, a person may not harm another individual. 3, a person may not stand by and laugh as another person drowns. 4, a person must share their extra food with another person who is starving to death. 5, a person may not steal food in order to save his or her own life. This is a stark contrast.
Yeah, so before this, how would you say which one of these 5 are true? According to Western society, which ones would you think are part of the law and which one do you think don't align with the law?
1, 2, oh wait, of another person's.
Oh, you got it right, yeah. 1,
Yeah, 1,
correct,
2, that's it. Oh wait, and 5.
Very good. Correct. 1, 2, and 5 are Western society. Those laws are applied because you do not have the right to infringe on my person, on my property, in order for you to do what you need to do. And also, I don't have an obligation to help you. So that is from a Western point of view. Now let's look at our slides here momentarily. Sheila, who is supposed to ensure these rights in Western society? We have over here, of course, a police officer, the politician, the lawmaker, the doctor. What's your thoughts?
Well, the laws are supposed to do it, and the police only enforce it. But the laws are the ones that do it, no?
Correct. So if you notice, it's not the role of the government to tell me what I should do, but rather the government cannot obligate me to do anything, with a few exceptions like taxes. But in general, the government can only stop me from doing something that will infringe on another individual's rights. Meaning, the government is not here to tell me what I need to do. It's just telling me what I cannot do because it's interfering with someone else's freedom. And then we have many different people that are supposed to fulfill the obligation of the government, starting with doctors. They have the medical ethics of what they're allowed to and not allowed to do, the politicians, the lawmakers. But because also there's many different people in different fields, each one deals with their task on hand. There's no one in charge of everything. Each department deals with what it is responsible for and nothing else. So even the president, the most powerful, he cannot dictate anything and everything. There's lawmakers as well as Senate and House. There's different responsibilities for different departments, and each one doesn't tell me what I need to do. It just makes sure that I do not do what I'm not allowed to do. Based on such a society, Elia, if you could read this question and answer it on your own, a little bit of a hint is given in the picture itself.
What is the underlying social expectation in a legal system based on rights? Well, not pretty low, I guess. Like there's not.
Yeah,
much.
correct. There's not a lot of expectations because you just have rights, but there's nothing that's demanded of you. There's no laws really, except with, like we mentioned before, taxes and similar, that tells you what you need to do. It's more telling you what you are given by society. Let's watch over here this little clip to see how this plays out in real life.
It's an age-old ethics question that has no right answer, but a recent ruling made by Italy's highest appeals court could change that for the homeless. The ruling was on behalf of a homeless Ukrainian man accused of stealing small amounts of sausage and cheese in 2011. He was originally sentenced to 6 months in jail and a roughly $100 fine, but appealed that decision. On Monday, Italy's highest court threw out that conviction, writing the condition of the defendant and the circumstances in which the seizure of merchandise took place prove that he took possession of that small amount of food in the face of an immediate and essential need for nourishment, acting therefore in a state of necessity.
Okay, so you have, of course, the dilemma. Yes, I don't want people stealing, but what happens if someone stole because they have to survive? And that's where these questions come. And of course, every judge, every lawyer will look at it slightly different. This guy was put in prison and taken out because we're still unsure how to view this last point.
It's an age.
Now let's move on to the Jewish version. How does the Judaism view these questions of rights? So let's start with the fundamental word, how Judaism looks at all these aspects. And Sheila, if you'd like to read what we have on the screen.
What is the definition of a mitzvah? Suggestion, commandment, request, right.
Which one do you think is the correct answer?
Commandment.
Very good. Mitzvah is a commandment. Notice the stark difference between a right and a commandment. A commandment doesn't mean it's a suggestion. It's something that I highly advise. It's something that you are obligated to do. Parents don't come with their children's rights as the first and foremost. They say there are rules in the home of how things need to be run. So too we have, God gives us commandments, which is telling us, number one, what are we obligated to do? Let's pull it up over here, the first text where we find this aspect. And Elia, if you'd like to read, this is from Genesis chapter 2, the first time that God's giving a commandment to man, to the first man. Let's look at the term that he uses.
Okay. Text 3.
Yeah.
God took the man and placed. I have to read the top part. How many of these overlap secular? No.
Yeah, I skipped that point. We'll get back to it. You could just read the text.
Okay.
That's fine.
God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till it and tend it. And God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you are free to eat, but as far for the tree of knowledge and as far for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat of it. For as soon as you eat it, you shall die.
Very good. So notice that God doesn't say, I give you a right to eat every fruit of the tree, and other trees, I would ask you kindly, please spare it for me, don't eat it. God makes it very clear, and he says, you could eat from every tree, but one tree you are not allowed to eat from. And notice that it's an obligation because there's a punishment. When it's a request, there cannot be a punishment. I cannot request you, please don't do something, and if you do it, there's a punishment. I have to tell you, you cannot do this, and then there could be a punishment for it. So starting with this commandment, and notice we'll go back over here to this activity. If you look at the 10 commandments, which one of the 10 commandments does God give as a suggestion, and which one does he give as a commandment? Anybody have an opinion about that? Are there any one of the 10 commandments, I'll ask it in an easier way, that are suggestions, or are they all commandments, as in hinted in the word? 10 commandments. Sheila, what's your thoughts? Are any of the 10 commandments suggestions and requests, or are they all commandments, as in this is what you must do?
I don't really know, but by definition, a commandment, if it's called the 10 Commandments, I would think God gave Moses 10 commandments, and it means commandments.
Exactly. Very good. You're 100% right. The commandments are called the 10 Commandments for a reason, because they're not, as there was a slogan someone had in his home, I saw, he said the 10 Commandments was not a, what's it called? Multiple choice question. It wasn't like God says, here's 10, choose which ones you want to fulfill. It's 10 commandments, meaning you got to do all of these. That's what it requires to be a part of God's people. So over here we have the word vayitzav, which God commanded to Adam not to eat from the tree. It's clearly, all the commentaries agree, means commanded, not suggested. And the 10 commandments weren't voluntary, nice ideas that were suggestions, but rather they were commandments for the Jewish people. Not only that, the Talmud discusses how the Jewish people were actually, to a certain degree, forced into accepting it. On a literal level, it discusses how God told them that if they won't fulfill the commandments, they'll all die. But even on a deeper level, it was God showing them his love. He was showing them his purpose of how he sees the world. And they were, by experiencing this great revelation, sort of not given a choice in the sense that they wanted to do what God wants. But ultimately, it was never an option. It was more an obligation, which sounds extreme. And we'll explain this later on in the class. And let's read over here on this screen, and then I'll pull up the next test. Again, next text from that professor. So Elia, if you'd like to read over here, what would be the difference? And notice also the picture is expressing the difference between rights, which is what Western society gives us, and obligations, which is what the Torah gives us.
So wait, I'm explaining the difference.
Yeah, you could read what it says and then explain what you see the difference in the pictures, and then give your own insight.
So for rights in like Western society, it says what I deserve, and that's like people like feeling like they deserve certain extra like things in their day-to-day life. And for obligations, what I owe is like somebody helping the guy get up on where they're hiking, and that's like you can't just leave somebody. It's like you are obliged to help somebody if they're in need and you're able to. So
right, very good. So it's more of a what are you here for, rather than what is supposed to be given to you. It's asking, what is my purpose, what are my requirements, rather than what are people supposed to be giving to me. And let's ask this question, Sheila, if you could read this question and give us your opinion on that.
If someone has a right to life, should they have the right to die?
Right?
My
So,
personal opinion?
yeah.
Yes.
Right? Which, of course, if we come from the basis of rights, then
I mean, under circumstances, you know,
Right.
I have to clarify that,
clarify.
circumstances.
No, just to clarify, I know that we did have this discussion. I agree with you that in certain cases, when someone is medically challenged, meaning they're in an old state, they're in a medical stage where they won't be able to recover, then there could be discussion. In general, Judaism views against it, but there's a difference also between not administering extra aid and versus taking away the essential aid that a person needs. Meaning there's a difference between pulling a plug and stopping someone's oxygen to not give them a surgery or not give them additional medication, which would allow them to live on longer. But let's ask the question, not in a case of someone that's sick and ill and they won't recover, but ask it for a young guy, a 20-year-old guy. He's feeling a little stressed out. His girlfriend dropped him. He didn't get accepted to school. He doesn't have money. His parents kicked him out of the home. Do you think he should be able to commit suicide and take away, he has a right to live, so he has a right to die? Or do you think that he has an obligation to live? An obligation to live means even if you choose you want to die, it wasn't always about what your choice is. There's someone out there that gave you an obligation. So this is an essential difference that we find between rights versus obligation. And let's read the text inside from this professor that we quoted before. And we have it over here. Sheila, if you'd like to read.
Number 5?
Yeah.
Oh. When I asked to reflect upon Judaism and human rights, therefore, the first thought that comes to mind is that the categories are wrong. I do not mean, of course, that basic ideas of human dignity and worth are not powerfully expressed in the Jewish legal and literally traditions. Rather, I mean that because it is legal tradition, Judaism has its own categories for expressing thought, law, of worth and dignity of each human being. And the categories are not closely analogous to human rights. The principal word in Jewish law, which occupies a place equivalent to evocative force to the American legal systems. Rights is the word mitzvah, which literally means commandment, but has a general meaning closer to incumbent obligation.
Very good. So to summarize, this is the first section of the class. American legal system or secular legal system is based on rights. So what are the laws? The laws are there to protect my rights. That's what all the laws are. If you want to summarize every law, it's about protecting the rights of the citizens. By contrast, Jewish law, it's all about obligations. And the law, the Torah, is there to clarify, to outline, and explain what are my obligations and responsibilities. So it seems very similar. And a lot of times we reach the same goal, but the directions that we're coming from are very different. Am I coming from, this is what you need to do, versus this is what we're deciding in order to protect you? Let's move on to section number 2. The injustice of justice. And Elia, if you'd like to read this first section.
2, the injustice of justice. The Jewish mitzvah-based system goes far further than the American rights-based system. This is because 1, it places obligation on specific parties to ensure results, and 2, it obligates social responsibility even though no rights are being violated.
Very good. So let's read an example of that. Sheila, if you'd like to read from here at the top of the page, and then this text.
There is much overlap between a rights-based system and an obligation-based system. For instance, both systems prohibit murder, stealing, etc. But an obligation-based system is more effective in ensuring results because it places responsibility on specific individuals. Let us use education as an example.
Okay, so let's read over here. This is from the International Declaration of Human Rights. If you could read Article 26.
Article 26 of the International Declaration of Human Rights, a document drawn up by a panel of experts at the UN to detail a basic character of universal human rights, reads as follows. Everyone has a right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available Higher education shall be equally accessible to all on a basis of merit. Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial and religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. Parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children.
Very good. So notice over here, they write that there is a right for education. Now, you don't see over here who is supposed to fulfill this right. Who's responsible to pay for this? Is the UN going to pay for every child's education? Is that the responsibility of a wealthier nation has to pay for a poorer nation's education? It gives us a right without putting the responsibility on someone specific. Let's look in contrast to the Jewish law. This is from the Talmud, Tractate Kiddushin. It discusses the obligation of teaching. And Elia, if you'd like to read.
A father is obligated with regard to his son to circumcise him and to redeem him if he is a firstborn son who must be redeemed by payment to a priest, and to teach him Torah, and to marry him to a woman, and to teach him a trade. And some say a father is obligated to teach his son to swim.
Very good. So notice over here, it gives us a specific person, not a general right that a child could learn, but it says who is supposed to teach the child. When you delegate a job to a company, or this works well in a family dinner even, you're sitting at the table, if you say something past this, but you don't give a specific name, highly likely that you won't get it passed because no one knows that you're speaking to them. You have to always give a specific name, or if you're a manager of a company, you don't just come in and say, someone do this, you say, Mr. X, this is your task that you need to do. If you don't give a defined person the obligation, it's likely not to get done. So the Torah says the father, every child has a father in general. Of course, we're going to discuss later if the father passes away. But if you bore a child into this world, you have the responsibility to educate him and the basics of finding him a job, and to teach him how to swim so he can protect his life. It's giving it to a specific person. Versus in the secular society, who's supposed to pay? There's still arguments till today. Is it the government, the state government, the local district, the parents? Who's supposed to pay for a child's education to make sure that it actually happens? Let's look over here. We have additional details regarding this law. And Elia, if you'd like to read text 8, and then Sheila, you'll read text 9. This is going into greater detail from what the Talmud said.
Text 8, Shulchan Aruch. Okay, one must hire a teacher for his son. However, he need not hire a teacher for his son of his fellow.
Right, meaning your responsibility is for your son. Each parent has to hire a teacher for their son. And now let's read Shulchan Aruch Harav. Sheila, if you'd like to read text number 9, the rabbis. This goes
The
into...
rabbis instituted that the salary of elementary school teachers would come from the communal funds for education for all children in the city, the wealthy and poor alike. In our countries, the custom is that each individual pays for his own son if he can afford it. However, if one cannot afford it, the community must pay for him, as was originally established by the rabbis. The poor can coerce the wealthy to pay from the community fund. The wealthy people can coerce one another to pay the salaries of the teachers from the community fund. Even one who does not have children must contribute to the community fund. Such was originally established by the rabbis to have teachers in every city, whether large or small, and that the salaries of the teachers who shall teach the wealthy and the poor will be upon the community. Each individual shall contribute according to his means.
Very good. So we see here clearly it defines the obligation of the parents, and then if not, how the community has to pull up and do their part to make it happen. Let's look over here. This is more, of course, the debate. We're not getting into the politics of this aspect, but it shows us that when there's no obligation but a right, it doesn't define who has to make sure that right is fulfilled. And this is more of a comical way how in the 1960s, The parents, of course, would scream at the child if they got an F. And these days, this was made in 2010, the one to blame is the teacher. So it's just more of a comical side to see how the blame gets shifted from different people as to the lack of education. Each person, each department blames the other, passes on the buck to the next person, saying, oh, we don't have to pay for it. The next person should pay for it. Let's go back to our text. And Elia, if you'd like to read over here, text number 10.
Just as wearing tefillin every day is a mitzvah commanded by the Torah to every individual, regardless of his standing in Torah, whether deeply learned or simple, so too is an absolute duty for every person to spend a half hour every day thinking about the Torah education of children, and to do everything in his power and beyond his power to inspire children to follow the path along which they are being guided.
Very good. So that's the responsibility, the obligation of the parent. So getting back to this question, what is lacking in the rights system, meaning the system that gives everybody rights? Let's read back from our professor that we mentioned before. And Sheila, if you'd like to read this part where he explains text 11.
Okay. The jurisprudence of rights has proved singularly weak in providing for the material guarantees of life and dignity flowing from the community to the individual. While we may talk of the right to medical care, the right to subsistence, the right to education, we are constantly met by the realization that such rhetorical tropes are empty in a way that rights to freedom of expression or the rights to due process are not. The right to an education is not even an intelligible principle unless we know to whom it is addressed. Taken alone, it only speaks to a need. A distributional premise is missing, which can only be supplied through a principle of obligation. In a system of mitzvahs, this problem does not arise. Jewish law is very firm in its guarantee of an education. Something approaching universal schooling was pursued perhaps 2 millennia ago.
Yeah, so that's the way the Jewish version looks at it. So back to our slide here, we can compare the differences of rights is always about a need. Obligation is you're needed for. Does the parent have a right to be able to do as they please, or are they needed for something? They have an obligation to teach their children. You bore a child, you were given a gift by God to have a child. You have certain obligations which you are needed for. This is what you need to do. Comparing another example, American law, murder takes away the victim's right to live, meaning my problem why I'm not allowed to murder someone is because I cannot take away someone else's right to freedom, to happiness and to life. Versus Jewish law says, I have an obligation to preserve life. Now, if murder, the problem is I'm taking away the rights of the victim. What happens if I'm not taking it away? I'm watching someone drown, or the guy wants to commit suicide himself. I don't have to interfere. I don't have to do anything. Jewish law says you have an obligation to preserve life. You're not here just for yourself. You're here as a whole. Human beings as a whole are here to preserve life. So your life or someone else's life are equally important. And therefore, you cannot allow someone else to lose their life if you can do something about it. And Elia, if you'd like to read this quote.
Even when American and Jewish law look identical, the obligation-based system of Jewish law goes further to protect human life.
So it goes, we'll expand on it in later lessons with more examples, but as much as it seems similar and things look alike in that sense, there are differences with how much a person is responsible to take care of someone else. Let's read a text over here from this next one. So this is regarding the right to food. Elia, if you'd like to read text number 12.
Text 12. Thanks to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the fundamentals for justice have been clear for nearly 7 decades, and yet 68 years later, genocide, hunger, and brutal abuses of power still exist. And political parties that shun respect for human rights are gaining traction, from India to France to Hungary to the United States. So what's holding us back? Why hasn't the Universal Declaration of Rights led to the universal realization of human rights? One crucial roadblock is responsibility. I have the right to food, but who is responsible for making sure it is realized? Me, my family, the local government, the state? What a despot infringed on the rights of citizens. Who ensures that the right people are protected? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights dictates that it is the responsibility of governments, and failing that, the international community of nations, to protect our freedom. Yet this mandate is vague, broad, and very difficult to enforce. Unlike our constitutional democracies, our international law, the Jewish legal system doesn't start from the fundamental premise that people are owned freedoms. Rather, Jewish law is built on the concepts of obligation and commandment. It focuses on what individuals and leaders must do to serve God, act justly towards others, and bring about redemption. For example, though Judaism does not establish a right to food, Jewish traditions obligate farmers to leave a corner of their field peah unharvested so that the poor can gather the crop farmers leave behind. Additionally, each community is obligated to set up a soup kitchen and general fund to assist the poor. By placing the obligation on individual farmers and on the community, the system has the benefit of being clear about how the poor will be fed. In contrast to the Declaration, which mandates the rights to sustenance without a script for how that will be fulfilled.
Very good. So here it gives us clear directives of who is supposed to do this, who has the responsibility. Notice the Torah doesn't say, oh, there's poor people. You're allowed to steal from someone's field if you're poor. Stealing is prohibited. However, the Torah says the farmer, if you have a field, you must leave a portion of your field. And this is just one example. There's actually many gifts that every farmer had to give from his field. Besides for leaving a corner, anything that falls while they're harvesting, they have to leave for the poor. They have to give 1/10 to the Levite. They have to give a percentage to the Kohen. And there's other gifts that had to be given to the poor, brought to the temple, different years. So there were many, many portions that there were specific numbers, times, locations, who has to do it and when, not general concepts of everybody has a right to food, but each farmer also has a right to protect his property and does not have to give anything to anyone. So this is an example where we can see the social responsibility. And let's read, Sheila, if you can read this part, social responsibility.
Sorry. Okay. In American law, you cannot steal because that would infringe on another person's right to own property. In Jewish law, the problem with that is that it is wrong to steal. We are obligated not to steal. In American law, you cannot murder because you would be taking away the victim's right to life. In Jewish law, you cannot murder because murder is wrong, and you are obligated to preserve life.
Very good. So to give it in other words, how does the American law work? It identifies rights that are self-evident according to their opinions, and then it works to protect those rights through logical progression. However, Jewish law works that it comes from God. What ultimately decides what's right or wrong, what I'm obligated to do, what I'm not? Completely from God. God is the one that is, we believe, the ultimate good one, and therefore he decides what I am responsible to do, what I'm not responsible to do. And we're going to elaborate on this further, but this is just as a general overview on the first class, the difference between how the two societies come to their decisions. So let us go back now to our first video, the Bystander Dilemma, right? And let's read again this article. Elia, if you'd like to read this page.
The Bystander Dilemma. You just said that. CNN, 5 teenagers who taunted a drowning man as they recorded his death in Florida will not face charges because by law they were not required to help. In a video recorded last July, the teens, ages 14 to 17, laughed at Jamal Dunn, 31, struggled to stay afloat in a pond near his family's home in Cocoa, police said. Sorry, The
I
teen-
guess it's a place in Florida. I'm not familiar with it either, but yeah.
kind of funny. The teens taunted the man that he was going to die and said they were not going to help him. Instead, the teens chuckled as they recorded the victim's final moments and posted the video on YouTube. During a subsequent interview, the teens admitted they were smoking weed, police said. The Cocoa Police Department had recommended to the state attorney's office that the group face charges of failure to report a death. But last week, the state's attorney office announced that the group will not be criminally prosecuted. As previously acknowledged by the Cocoa Police Department and its and this office, there is no Florida law that requires a person to provide emergency assistance under the fact of that case, said Todd Brown, a spokesman for the office of the state attorney. A law intended to address this type of situation was proposed during this year's legislative session, but failed to receive sufficient support.
Right, which again, like you mentioned earlier, it would be nice if they help, but unfortunately, the way our legal system is built, such a law cannot pass because it's not built on obligations for people. Okay, so this is an area where the Torah clearly says, there's a verse, Lo sa'amod al dam re'acha, do not stand by when your brother's blood is being spilled. You have an obligation to help him. Versus in this case, where you say you cannot hold them responsible. Okay, let's read a similar case that happened. Sheila, if you'd like to read over here, this text number 14.
In the early hours of the morning of March 14th, 1964, a young woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked on her way home to Queens, New York. The unknown assailant made several separate attacks on her over a period of about 40 minutes, and she finally died of the stab wounds that he had inflicted on her. As the police subsequently ascertained, at least 38 neighbors had heard her scream for help. Some may have also seen her struggle, yet no one intervened, not even to call the police. This example of neighborly interaction generated widespread discussion and analysis. Newspapers reporters make special reports of the incident. The University of Chicago Law School sponsored a conference of the Good Samaritan and the Bad, the law and the morality of volunteering in situations of peril or of failing to do so. The American Psychological Association in 1966 held a special session devoted to the problem of the unconcerned bystander. Numerous studies, papers, and articles were written about the Kitty Genovese incident as their point of departure.
There you go. So we have this problem. Let's look at a video where they make this experiment. So why doesn't anyone do anything in that video? Why doesn't anyone stop by to help out? American law is about rights, and there is no obligation involved. There's actually the Good Samaritan Act. It shows us how in American law, we had to pass a law which protects a volunteer that gave aid because you might have held him responsible. He was trying to be nice. You cannot hold him responsible. That is in contrast to saying the opposite, not just that if you give aid and you made a mistake, we cannot hold you responsible, but that you're obligated to give aid. We should have laws that not just protect the helper, but obligate someone to help. But unfortunately, that's not the way our system is based. and therefore there is no obligation like that. Let's read over here the text in Jewish law. And Elia, if you'd like to read text 15.
Yes. Okay. Maimonides'
Yeah.
laws of murder and the preservation of life. Whether a person can save another person's life, but he fails to do so, he transgresses a negative commandment. As Leviticus 19:16 states, do not stand idly by while your brother's blood is at stake. Similarly, the commandment applies when a person sees a colleague drowning at sea or being attacked by robbers by a wild animal, and he can save him himself or can hire others to save him. Similarly, it applies when he hears people conspiring to harm a colleague or planning a snare for him, but he does not inform him and notify him of the danger. And it applies when a person knows of a Gentile or a man of force which has a complaint against a colleague, and he can appease the aggressor on behalf of his colleague, and he fails to do so. And similarly, in all analogous instances, a person who fails to act transgresses the commandment. Do not stand idly by while your brother's blood is at stake.
Very good. So all these cases, he says, where you can help someone, you're obligated to help. It's not just something that we suggest, but there is an obligation. Let's look at, I'll pull up first the video, then we'll read the text inside, which I think also depends based on the state. But let's look at this a test or experiment that they ran.
Which I filled with just papers and receipts, inspired by DM Pranks Productions. Enjoy. I'll be there like, wait. Did you say opposite side of Ann Street? Ann Street. Yeah. Wait, on Ann Street or opposite side? Yeah, I'm on Ann Street. Yeah. Yeah, what's going on? Get a good shot. Yeah.
So what do we see over there? They had an opportunity, and it's shocking to see how the mother is encouraging the son, like, great job on the education there. You're really teaching your son good values, but they take it away. Now, why is that? Let's look at the sources over here of Jewish law. And Sheila, if you'd like to read over here, the American law column, and then we'll read the Jewish law column. Read first over here on the left side.
Okay. Common law defines just property as personal property that was unintentionally left by its true owner. For example, a wallet that falls out of someone's pocket is lost. Accordingly to common law, a person who found lost personal property could keep it until and unless the original owner comes forward.
Very good. So that's what you'll have in American law. Of course, it does differentiate a little bit between states if you have to give it to the state. But bottom line, you don't have an obligation to return anything. Let's read the Jewish law, which goes to the other extreme. And here you have two quotes from Exodus. If you could read the first one. Yeah, Sheila, if you'd like to read this one, the highlighted words from Exodus.
Okay. If you come upon your enemy's bull or his stray donkey, you shall surely return it to him.
And now the next quote from Deuteronomy, the last book of the 5 books.
Do not see your brother's ox or sheep straying and ignore them, return them.
Very good. So you have to return what you find. That's clearly another difference between a right versus obligation. There's no right that I have to return someone their item. I have a right to mind my own business. I don't have to return it. And on the contrary, I have a right that if I find something, I can keep it. Versus Jewish law gives me an obligation. Let's use this activity. And Elia, if you'd like to read these options and tell us what the answer is.
In Jewish law, which of the following are obligatory? I don't know how to pronounce it.
You got to write before, obligatory.
Oh, and which are voluntary? Circle the obligations and make rectangle around those who are optional. Okay, return a lost object. That's obligatory. Help someone whose car breaks down. That's obligatory, right? Or
Yep, correct.
help someone who's give charity. That's obligatory. Warn of oncoming danger. That's obligatory. Save from drowning in a pond. They're all obligatory. Is that how you say it? Right.
Oh, very good, very good. Now look at secular law. Most of these things you would say are not obligatory. I don't have to warn you if there's a flood coming and going to hit your house and you should leave. If I want to, I can. I don't have to save you from drowning. I cannot be prosecuted. So yet we see over here a big contrast in the difference between them. So summarizing the second point, and then after that we'll go on to the third point. Sheila, if you'd like to read this page.
We have covered the second big idea. The Jewish mitzvah-based system goes further than the American rights-based system. This is because, one, it places obligation on specific parties to ensure results, and two, it obligates social responsibility even when no rights are being violated. In the following section, we will explore the third and final big idea. The Jewish people appreciate the fact that we are a part of God's plan and are on a mission to fulfill his commands to our utmost ability. Mitzvah are the ultimate good.
Very good. So to finish off the second part with the story, there was a fellow, a Chassid, that came to his Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, and he said, he comes complaining and he says, I lost much of my wealth this year. What will I do? He was crying and devastated. The rabbi turns to him, listens to his story, and after a few moments says, I hear only what you want from God, but what about what God wants from you? On that aspect, I don't hear anything. Similar, or as John F. Kennedy paraphrased it, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. He was shifting the rights to the obligations. Try to serve your country, and that way we can live actually a more fulfilling life, which think of it just in marriage, where this can play a huge role. If you come into your marriage with rights, then it has a really hard chance of it continuing. Versus if someone comes in with obligations, then that allows them to put themselves aside for the better cause. Let's move on to section number 3. Actually, I think we have here, let's pull up this video.
Ability to overcome them through God's commandments. The key is to start young, and that is in the hands of parents and educators.
Als ein Mensch wird beschaffen, ist jeder Leben Odom Rami Nura. Und die Schaß wächst beim der Chelik Atif Shebe, wie sie dort bei jeder Nivro, Lachas Kame Vekame Ba'alodom, auf Kol Ponim, soll sein Ligarnai und Vikayesi Base, verbunden mit
Ability to.
This is more of a comical way. I don't have a problem with entitlement. The problem is that I'm not getting what I want. This is the epitome of someone that feels entitled. Let's look at this picture. What's wrong with this picture, Elia?
So the guy parked in between 2 parking stalls, and that's not right.
And why do you think he did it? What's going through his mind?
He didn't care about if somebody else needed the spot.
Right. So in other words, we could summarize it as, if you view happiness as a right, then I'm entitled to happiness. And since it's a right, I don't care to consider anyone else or anything else outside of me if it doesn't make me happy. On the contrary, they're infringing on my right to be happy. So if I'm happy by parking like this, I'm entitled to do so. you don't have a right to tell me not to because it's infringing on my happiness. Versus if I have an obligation to society and I have an obligation to be happy, which we mentioned earlier in the previous course, that there's a commandment to be happy, it means it's a responsibility that I need to do. It's not just about whatever works for me. Moving on to the third section, we'll get back to the slide in a moment. Section number 3 is summarizing, based on what we said, that God gives us commandments. We don't want to misunderstand this as therefore we're enslaved, we're feeling subjugated, we're feeling depressed, we're feeling controlled by something outside of us. Rather, as much as it is an obligation, it is still not a life sentence. It's not a punishment, but rather it's a calling to a greater self. Elia, if you'd like to read section number 3.
Mitzvot. Sorry.
Yep.
Mitzvot, a life sentence or a calling. The Jewish people appreciate the fact that we are a part of God's plan and we are on a mission to fulfill his commandments to your utmost ability. Mitzvot are the ultimate good.
Right. So don't say that because we mentioned earlier that it's an obligation versus a right, therefore we're enslaved in a negative sense, but rather we are appreciating the fact that we were given obligations to allow us to lead a life that's the best option possible. Let's read over here. Sheila, if you'd like to read from the beginning over here and text 17.
Oh. On the one hand, the Jewish legal system is built upon the notion that we must obey God's command. At the same time, we see the Jewish people love, adore, and celebrate being commanded by God. Should I read
Right.
17?
Yeah.
Oh. Blessed are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us on the washing of the hands.
So again, we see over here that there's a commandment, but we don't say, oh God, this is so difficult. Why did you command us to wash our hands? We said, no, blessed are you, God. Thank you for sanctifying us with your commandments. Have you ever heard a slave respond this way to a commandment by his owner? Let's go back to our slides here. Does being a slave sound meaningful? You never hear a slave saying, I love this. This is an amazing life. He feels in chains. Right? Let's look at these coming up 3 slides and let's sum it all up with one word. And it'll give us a hint as to how we celebrate in society. I'll give you a hint. These are celebrating different birthdays in the American society or in general in the world. This is one. This is celebrating another birthday, has to do with this. And the third one. If we can summarize them, what would we say? I'll go back. This is you've turned 18 or 16, depending on the state. You're excited you get to drive. You turn 21, you're excited you get to vote. Depending on the state, at 21, you get to drink. So these are exciting, monumental parts of what we reach a stage where our rights are given to us. We're able to do certain things. In contrast, we'll have over here what God is commanding us. Elia, if you'd like to read whenever, and then text 18.
Whenever we perform a commandment, we thank God for commanding us. But we do celebrate, but why do we celebrate a bar bat mitzvah? If you think about it, that's the day when all of the obligations of Judaism are placed upon our shoulders. Text 18. A person should organize a festive meal on the day that his son becomes a bar mitzvah, similar to his child's wedding. The reason for this celebration is that now the son is becoming a Jewish adult and is commanded in mitzvot of the Torah. Do I keep going?
Yeah, so we'll pause here for a moment. So what do we see here by a Jewish celebration? At the celebration of a bar mitzvah, are you celebrating like those slides we had before that finally you get to drive, you get to vote, you get to drink? What is that summarizing all? Your rights. You're celebrating a birthday because now you got more rights. Judaism, not only do we mourn by a bar mitzvah, some people would say, oh, this is seemingly a time when you're obligated more things, you're given more tasks. We should have a ceremony where we're mourning a bar mitzvah. It's a sad time. But on the contrary, not just as a Jewish law, but it's common practice that we celebrate a bar mitzvah, a time when you're obligated to do more things. It becomes a celebration because who are you obligated to do this for? Not someone that's looking to enslave you, but someone that is looking to liberate you, to live above the minimal of just having rights, but living with a higher purpose, living with a greater cause. Let's read over here the next text. Not Sheila, if you'd like to read this in text 19.
Rabbi Judah the Prince says the following proclaims the excellence of the Jewish people. For when they all stood before Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, they all made up their mind alike to accept the reign of God joyfully.
So what do we see from here? That it's not just celebrating the bar mitzvah that was a happy occasion, but the Jewish people as a whole by Mount Sinai were extremely joyous that they became servants of God, because it's not servants to a master that wants to see you abused, but a master that wants to see you reach the greatest heights. And that's why we're happy for the commandments of God. Don't mistake in the word commandment as against your will, but rather commandment is to encourage you to become the best you want to be. As a soldier going to the military, yes, there's many rules that the general tells him, but they're all happy about it because they want to be a good soldier. They want to push themselves to the limits. They want to be the Navy SEALs. They want to be that guy that really can do anything and everything. And they understand that the general is not looking to break them, but to build them up as good soldiers. Let's read over here, text 20, King David. Elia, if you'd like to read King David and then text 20.
King David speaks of his love for mitzvot and his utter joy at being able to perform them. Text 20. I will always obey your teaching forever and ever. I will walk about at ease, for I have turned to your precepts. I'll speak of your decrees and not be ashamed of the presence of kings. I will delight in your commandments, which I love. I reach out for your commandments, which I love. I study your laws.
So we see here how he's expressing his love and excitement, and he's not ashamed or embarrassed about it, but he feels proud and privileged. Doesn't mean that it's always going to be easy, but it's something that he feels freedom by doing, not feeling enslaved. So we'll pull up over here the next slide. Well, this is just a video of a bar mitzvah showing the celebration, which you all know. Everybody's excited for a bar mitzvah. But let's pull up our next one. Why are we so happy to keep so many mitzvot? It's not because we're feeling enslaved. Do slaves normally love being slaves? The answer is no, because they don't feel that their master is there for their benefit, for the slaves. They feel the master is there for his own benefit. By God, we're sure, and we feel it, that he's doing it for our better good. Let's read the next quote inside from 21. Sheila, if you'd like to read. This is from Deuteronomy.
And now, O Israel, what does God demand of you? Only this, to revere God, to walk only in his paths, to love him, and to serve God with all your heart and soul, keeping God's commandments and law, which I enjoin upon you today for your good.
Very good. So we see here he adds in those words, for your good. God saying, I didn't give you these commandments because I'm a master that needs slaves. It's for your good. It's to bring out the best in you. And let's read the last one, 22. Elia, if you'd like to read.
See, this day I set before you blessing and curse. Blessing that you obey the commandment of God and that I enjoin upon you this day, and curse if you do not obey the commandments of God, but turn away from the path that I enjoin upon you this day, and follow other gods whom you may not experience.
So again, we see here what's highlighted, what's in bold, that God says, I'm putting before you blessing by obeying God's commandments. It's not about putting you in chains. And as we have here, the last quote from the Mishnah, Rabbi Hanania says that God wanted to give us merits, and therefore he gave us many commandments, so we have many opportunities for growing and connecting with God in a greater way. So the multitude of mitzvot, the many commandments, are expressions of God's desire to elevate us, not to crush us. let's go way back to our key points so we could summarize this class, which gives us a general fundamental look on how things are different than we assume. Let's pull up over here. So it's two key points. Let's start with 1 through 4, and we'll move on to the next. Sheila, if you'd like to read point number 1.
The American legal system is largely based on rights. Individuals have rights, and the laws are there to protect them.
Right, and we said it's all about, we've looked around and said, what are rights that people have? And once we all agreed on certain rights, we said, now let us make laws that can allow those rights to be there, allow people to have those freedoms. Point number 2, Elia.
The Torah's legal system is based on social and personal obligation. The laws mandate certain behaviors.
So the Torah system is the opposite. It says, there's certain things that you need to do. And then the laws are not there to give you those rights. The laws are there to explain how is it that you have to do what you need to do. Point number 3, Sheila.
A rights-based system is about what I can have. An obligation-based system is about what I must give.
Very good. And point number 4, Elia.
A rights-based system can grant rights, but cannot always ensure that the rights will be granted.
Right, so that's what we said. The problem, number 1, is if you don't put it on someone specific, who's going to make sure it happens? Let's read point number 5, Sheila.
An obligation-based system places the burden on individuals, ensuring that desired outcomes are reached.
So we gave the example of a father must teach their sons, a farmer must leave charity from his field, someone that observes someone else in danger, he must do something. He doesn't have the luxury of just walking away. That becomes his responsibility. Okay, 6, Elia.
As long as you are not infringing on another's rights, you have no social responsibility in a rights-based system.
Right. The only rights that the government needs to make sure you do is, of course, anything that infringes on their rights, like collecting taxes. So to take care of themselves, they have many laws, but to take care of other people's responsibilities, there are no. Thank God we have a society which is based on Torah values, so people give charity, which we skipped that one point where percentage-wise Jewish people are extremely more generous than others, because even those that are not following themselves a Torah observant life, for thousands of years we were educated with obligations rather than rights, and therefore that trickles over to all of those descendants to make sure that they feel an obligation to help when they can. Sheila, point number 7.
An obligation-based system can mandate social responsibility regardless of whether or not rights are being infringed upon.
Right. So Torah can mandate your responsibility, even if it's not infringing upon your right. You still have to do something because you're a part of a larger system. Who decides the laws? Not another man. God decided. So the same God that gave you those rights also gave you obligations. Okay, and our last point, Elia.
Even though mitzvot are obligations, Jews do not see them as a burden, but their highest calling.
Right, and this was to clarify, just because they're obligations doesn't mean that therefore we need to look at it as enslavement, but rather we are just as happy with it and we feel that this was given for our good. Okay, beautiful. With that, we'll conclude this class. It was a pleasure having you join, and we hope to see you again all next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Rabbi. Bye.
Bye.
Sure.